Good morning. Can you all hear me at the back? Great. Welcome to the 10th annual DUG conference, this year back at the Royal Society, and bigger than ever, thanks to help from the ESRC. Today we have an excellent lineup of speakers. Topics for discussion: understanding millions of mobile consumers has been a kind of topic that's cropped up at DUG meetings for the last year, so today's an opportunity to talk about the issues. This morning we'll have 4 speakers presenting, with time for discussion after every presentation. And this afternoon we have Professor David Rind taking over his chair and leading discussions on the focus of retail research and workshops on research priorities and skills and training. I'm hoping things hold together this morning. If you don't know me, my name's Ben Smith, the former Location Strategy Analysis Manager at Tesco.com label is because in the last couple of weeks I've moved to work with Telefonica on a project looking at understanding millions of mobile consumers, ironically enough. Just a few things to cover before we move on. If there is a fire, there's no scheduled testing this morning, so the exits are clearly shown. Please follow the signs to the right and left of the building. If you have a mobile phone, please switch it to silent. At the end of the day, there'll be an opportunity to give feedback in each of the presentations, and all the presentations will be available on the website probably by the end of the week. Keith, is that getting a thumbs up on that one? That's good. Ish. For those of you who are not familiar with DUG, DUG's an organisation of invited commercial data users. It's basically a community of like-minded data people. So we come together, talk about data issues, and look at data that we'd like to have that we currently don't have, and talk about issues we currently have with data. We meet quarterly at the fabulous Goring Hotel. There are away days, conferences and training, and between meetings also an opportunity to talk to fellow members about issues that we're all going through. Current members, there are 16 of them, some major high street retailers here and other large commercial users of data. So when I first arrived at DUG 10 years ago, I had a bit of an impression it might be like the top left, which is kind of a group of guys, data scientists, a little bit scary, but actually turned up and it was a very nice atmosphere, basically of people in commercial companies looking for data to solve business problems. Every year, DUG gives an award out, so we've had some illustrious winners recently, Francis Maud winning recently, and Keith always awards his famous Charles Booth map. In terms of what my kids would think of mobile consumers, I asked them, and they drew these pictures. My eldest draws loads of apps. They're basically downloading apps to do maths homework, to play games, to learn Spanish. Minecraft is a popular one, Temple Run. And my youngest just sees mobile phones as being worn all over your body, on your head, on your glasses, around your neck, as part of everyday life. So mobiles are part of their lives, and they see it, nothing unusual about that. I knew my kids were in touch with the mobile world when I was coming back from the Wimbledon tennis in the summer, and I received a text message, which I can read to you. This was 7 o'clock at night, and they were being babysat by their granny. So I received this email. Hi Ben, thanks for your purchase. Get the popcorn ready and hit play. You're good to go. You've bought Wreck-It Ralph. Watch unlimited for 48 hours from first playback. Start watching. Total paid £3.49. So my youngest, Rosa, who's 6, had gone onto my Xbox, connected to the digital TV, found the app for Blinkbox, found the movie, and paid for it. My wife went absolutely crazy. I actually thought it was really clever. So that's part of their daily lives, using mobile phones and accessing mobile phones. And one of the things they've been getting into recently is this geocaching app. It's a great example of how you can use mobile technology to engage with future generations. Here, there's treasure placed all around the country. So if you're in a local area, you can put your location and it'll tell you treasure around your area that you can go and look for. You can then go and find it, put your own messages, and also put your own treasure there for other people to find. So it's a great example of how it's a positive way of using mobile technology. A lot of news stories begin with maps, and I quite like this example where during the riots 2 years ago, this is a link up between ITO World and The Guardian, looking at 600 people who were in the magistrates' courts accused of rioting in Manchester, and looking at their home addresses and basically plotting the likely routes to come to the riots. Very interesting. There's a really funky video that goes with it. The only thing about this is it's actually looking at the modelled location where they came from. So you don't actually know where these people came from, but it's modelling likely routes. So what if we actually knew where these people came from? Well, we all created digital footprints. From the moment you wake up, you use your mobile phone, you text, you move between cells. If you don't use your mobile phone for 2 or 3 hours, your mobile phone company will ping you and find out where you are. So basically, we all have this footprint, and our location is known 24 hours a day. So here, for no particular reason, I've chosen a midweek championship game between Blackpool and Leeds United. And it just shows the kind of effects you can get from this data. So it shows where people have come from to actually attend the Ellen Road game, from knowing their home address and knowing where they ended up. It just shows the fantastic distance people have travelled for a midweek game on Wednesday night from Scarborough and Hull, Derby, up to Leeds, and obviously from Blackpool, a hotspot there for people coming to the match. It's a really interesting way of using the data. So if we're linking this big data with location and time, ultimately we're going to have personalisation where people are engaged with this process. They have apps and they're shopping. And at the time they're shopping, they can have targeted emails, messages coming through to get them fully engaged with the whole shopping process and up to date with offers in the store. So with this mobile data, location and time, it creates a real opportunity. So those are a few of my thoughts. I think we're now ready to hand over to our first speaker, who's Andy Thompson from Sainsbury's.
Morning, everybody. Really privileged to address the DUG conference today. I've not had the opportunity to attend this conference before, having worked in the wrong part of the industry, on the consultant side for a long time, but now I'm client side. Keith has deemed it possible to allow me to come and address you. I've been asked to just give sort of the retail perspective on the whole new area around mobile consumer and how they're consuming, how they're purchasing in now and in the future. I have got grocery examples, but also I've got some examples from non-grocery. And I've also got quite a few just anecdotes and pointers really to help us guide through the day and sort of introduce themes that the other speakers are going to focus a little bit more detail on later. So just as by introduction, I'm going to talk a little bit about what's on consumer minds and what the context is currently in terms of economic and what trends we're seeing. Introduce the concept of total retail, which I'll be completely honest with you, was a new term to me only till a couple of days ago when I started researching this topic. And then just by definition, talk about what we mean by customers on the move and mobile, and then serving that customer through examples of the convenience format, so a bricks and mortar example, and then looking at shopping on the move. But rather than go through the sort of corporate spiel on who we are, I thought we'd get a little bit interactive and start off with a bit of audience participation. Everyone, I'm sure, loves a quiz, so here we go, a little quiz, and we have got prizes. Samantha, in the middle there on table 10, is going to be doing the handing out. So, here we go. The year Sainsbury's was founded in. Come on. Victorian London.
1869.
Right, and the man at the front there, give him a bag of sweets. Okay, we'll keep going. The year we first started recycling cardboard.
95.
Quite cold. Further back.
75.
Further back. 52, no, further back.
45.
Further back.
39.
Close, we'll give that, we'll call 39 close. Not exactly right, but 1931, which I thought was quite an interesting stat. What they were recycling it for, I've absolutely no idea, but we did start recycling it. Okay, how many nectar card holders do we have? To the nearest 500,000 we'll take.
18 million.
Lower. Lower.
12.
That'll do, 12 and a half. Oh, actually 13 and a half, sorry. I'm thinking annual report now, I'm thinking this year, sorry. So we'll take that and how many customer transactions do we have each week? Big business?
5 million.
Higher. Higher than 20.
30 million.
Lower. It's like play your cards right, isn't it? We're going to get on to the presentation. We've got another 6 to go, so you've got to get a bit snappy, guys. Come on.
27.
Lower.
23.
Good. We'll take that as the right answer. 23 and a half. Okay. Sales from FIFA 14. I know we've got some gamers in the room. Obviously Ben. In the first week of launch, to the nearest million.
3.
Higher.
6.
Well done. 5. Correct answer. How much of our store waste goes to landfill?
No.
Good answer. 0 waste to landfill. Which is something we're quite proud of. How much did we raise as a business for Comic Relief last year? To the nearest million.
23.
Lower. We're generous, but not that generous. Oh, sorry, you're generous, but not that generous.
4 million.
Higher. Did I hear 8? It's getting closer.
12.
I think double digit, but not quite as high as 12. Did I hear, what was that? 10 and a half. Well, you work for Sainsbury's, you should know that. So. And then annual size of our GOL business, we'll take that to the nearest 100 million. But I'll give you a clue, it's a nice round number. Higher. Think 10 times higher.
900 million.
We'll give that. We'll give because Ben is doing the job at the front. We'll give him that 900 million. It's a billion actually. Okay, here we go. The shoppers in the room. 8-pack of Sainsbury's Taste of Different pork sausages, outdoor bread. How much?
199.
When did you last go shopping for sausages?
369.
Higher. 5ers getting close. Take 50p either way. We'll have to give it to the 5er. It's £4.50. And finally, who makes our shortbread biscuits? Well done. Walkers. So feel free to share your sweets with the people on your table. Introduce yourselves to the people you don't know, and I'll get on with the presentation. So in terms of the economic situation, just a simple infographic of what's happening. But basically, things not changing. Let me just get this. Things not changing significantly. If you look at the arrows here, we're talking about pretty much carrying on as we have been for the last while. But down here, in terms of people thinking about saving, for example, they're saying that now they would try and keep hold of that disposable income and not spend it, which is not good for retail, obviously. So our outlook is pretty, economic outlook is pretty weak at the moment. Nothing's going to be changing much. So we're in a fairly stagnant situation as an economy and also as a retail industry. In terms of concerns, this is IGD data. In terms of concerns the customers have, nothing too, they're worried about cost of living. Good news is they're not so worried about social unrest and breakdown in society, so we're all safe in our homes at night, or feel a little bit safer. And because we're talking about the mobile shopper and how we serve those guys, this is quite an interesting stat that actually value and then some of the CSR, this corporate responsibility and sourcing issues are quite high, but the actual cost of getting to and from a store, if you like, the cost of doing your shop is actually quite low in their mind. And because everyone loves a bargain, and my children take the complete mickey out of me all the time about the bog offs. I never buy anything unless it's 3 for the price of 2. Everyone's looking to try and save money in store. So what does this mean for grocery retailers in particular? We've got this sort of time-rich, cash-poor section of shoppers now who will shop around for bargains. They will shop in multiple shops. They will shop in the discounters, they'll shop in the main stores, and they'll also shop in the independents. And then we've got the time poor and cash rich that they'll buy for that day or the next only. They'll really exploit the convenience store network, spending with small baskets. And just by way of introduction, obviously, in order to try and understand these shoppers on the move, we have the benefit of using observations from our Nextcard data. So as well as observing at store points, we can also look at behaviour, although obviously we don't have Nectar coverage for all our customers. So in terms of shopping online as an activity in this sort of new age of technology, then we are seeing in the younger and more affluent sectors, people really doing a lot of shopping online, probably more than we would expect to be seeing. And then we've got people using m-commerce and tablet and smartphones to actually do their shopping on the move. That's also rising. Daily use of the internet, and also sales by device. And forecasting forward, the view from our strategy team is that these are the sort of growths we're going to see. So quite substantial growths. And we're also going to see, in terms of demographics, obviously population increase, and I think we're going to hear more about those later on. And then also increases in the older age groups, and also from a socio-economic point of view, female employment, which has been in decline, is now starting to rise again. Change in household composition is something we need to be conscious of, and maybe driving these smaller shops, because more people living in single-family homes or smaller multi-occupancy environment where they don't have enough storage to take the whole full week shop and store it at home. So we see changes in that structure as well. And then, forgive this slide, this is definitely a slide from the strategy team, but the key point here is that the South and London are continuing to grow much, much faster than the rest of the country. This may not be new news, but at least the evidence shows that is carried on, and hence why there's so much concentration of retail activity trying to serve these customers in London and the greater London superstate, as people are now referring to it. So you can see a substantial difference in compound annual growth and also in house growth. This is a gross domestic household income forecast forward to 2023. So with that sort of backdrop, I'd like to just introduce the concept of this. We've been talking recently about multi-channel and omni-channel and all the ways that people are consuming. But there's a lot of evidence, and I'll be completely honest. I put Sainsbury's into that category, that there isn't a huge amount of joining up going across these different channels, and we've got to see the move, from where we've been as an industry to this idea that the customer only sees one business. They don't understand why they do this thing on a groceries online website, this thing on buying entertainment, and this thing when they go into store. So it's got to get a little bit more unified. And Frank Rizzo from Motorola, he his quote here identifies that customers only want to see one business, and therefore we as an industry need to start smartening up and being a little bit more conscious of the consumer's view rather than our view of how we structure ourselves. So, dictionary.com's definition of mobile, forgive the Americanisms, we've got 9 different ways of interpreting what we mean by mobile. Obviously, digital technology, number 2, is one that we're focusing on today. And then you can choose from many of the others if you're talking about a customer. The idea of flowing freely as a liquid customer is one of interest, or one that goes shopping with military precision. But basically, we're talking about people on the move, consuming in different ways at different locations. So what I wanted to concentrate now on is just talk about a bricks and mortar example and of how we're serving customers through convenience stores. And then the second part of my presentation is going to talk a little bit more about consuming through m-commerce and mobile devices in different other parts of retail. So managed to get all the way to this point in the presentation without showing you a picture of a shop. So here's a picture of a shop. And here's a picture of another shop. So this is our super fresh shop in Shamwick Place in Edinburgh, which is one of our newer formats. And you'll be familiar. You'll be all the main big 4 retailers and some of the others are all starting to go with these sort of more friendly environments in terms of stores. A lot more fresh. This is a very high footfall. This is off the end of Princes Street. For those of you who don't know, Edinburgh is a very high footfall location. And it's actually slightly bigger than a normal convenience store, which we would call a cut-off at 3,000 square feet. This is a 5,000 square foot unit. So it doesn't take advantage of the extended opening hours. And here we have, not totally new news, but PFS located convenience store. This is Horley down near Gatwick. But it's not, I think those who watch the industry will see there's a huge amount of press around the drive forward in convenience, and mainly from the multiples. We only have a small percentage of the total market of the 18,000 convenience stores across the UK, and all of these names up here have all declared, if you like, I wouldn't say open warfare, but they're all talking 100 plus stores a year for the next 3 or 4 years. Apart from perhaps Waitrose, I think I'll probably only do 10 or 12, and I apologise to the guys from M&S. I did think about putting Simply Food up in here, but I actually don't know what you're going to be doing next couple of years. So, but driving forward, and then obviously Tesco with their one-stop are moving into the smaller stores as well. And we shouldn't forget the discounters, and to some people are now talking about Aldi as no longer in the discount category. It's much more mainstream, and they're going to locations. This is Kilburn High Street, so we're not sure whether this is a convenience store or not. It's quite a large store, but they're certainly going to the more urban locations, and they're not dealing with their traditional model of a standalone unit with a load of parking. So this is definitely dealing with a different type of customer for them, somebody who's urban and likely to be shopping in lots of different locations as they move around in their daily schedule. And can't forget our friends in Welland. So they are trialling this super convenient store inside a large Tesco Extra or a large superstore. The idea being that lots of people are shopping the large shops on a convenience mission, and then this gives them the freedom just to dip in and dip out as quickly as they can. And also then there's they're sucking up of the excess space they've got in their larger stores with gym and other retailers going in there, and their expansion into coffee shops and bakeries, giving that consumer more choice when they actually land in the shop, but not necessarily from a convenience location. So I just want to talk about assumptions around convenience shopping. So we're talking about different types of missions: a home, a work, and an amenity-based mission. I'm just going to quickly move on because I am conscious of time. And our research shows that we've looked at the way people are purchasing in our convenience stores, and we've defined them into these categories of eat now, so something they consume straight away, eat later, something they buy and they take home and eat. Often they're buying non-food items, so they might buy a notebook or some pencils or something like that. And then along the bottom you've got the top-up small trolley and big trolley shops. Obviously we use a combination of in-store research and also matching that back to Nectar, so we can tie the customer right back to what was in the basket. And then in terms of profiles of these, you can see the difference in terms of across the supermarket estate and the local estate of how people are purchasing in those missions. So obviously not surprisingly, we still see quite a lot of eat now and eat later in our supermarkets, which from a convenience point of view for the customer on the move is not ideal, because there's you have to walk around a large shop in order to get to the items that they actually want. This is a profile across those mission types. This is old Acorn, so apologies for that, not new Acorn. And you see, there is quite a big skew in certain categories. These are they're slightly named slightly different. This is eat later. This is grab and go. This is a non-food, so a slightly different way of naming. You see, there's a flat demographic skew in certain missions, but much more spiky in others. And then the trade profiles, they're a lot flatter than we assume, and you see there's still the breakfast and the evening peak, but people who shop near their place of work shop all through the day. And that was something new that we learned from this research that we weren't aware of before. In terms of travel to and from the store, from an amenity-based, people are mainly travelling less than 100 metres, so they are really shopping locally to where they are in terms of their habits. I'm just going to move on here. And then just finally, just to come back to this London issue, when we look at, this is half year, so this is 2013 to date, this is all the customers and this is all the stores they shopped in, and you can see that London is over-indexing significantly against the rest of the country in terms of the people's promiscuity about how they shop in Sainsbury stores, obviously, and they're all probably shopping in other stores as well. So hence the understanding that there is a huge amount of mobility in our customer base. So I just want to talk you through an example in Brixton of how we've tried to change the way we serve that market based on what we believe the customer mobility is. So we've got 2 stores in Brixton, existing station store, and then one further south at Lambert Road. There's the basic information there. Both small convenience stores, similar basket sizes. And actually our Brixton Station store is one of our best trading stores. But we needed to give it some relief because it just wasn't coping with the trade. So we opened 2 new stores, a small supermarket, 11,000 square foot to the south, and then just to the north of the Brixton Station, another local. I'll show you on the map. So that was the original station store, that's the new local, that's the existing Lambert Road, and this was the new supermarket. So we're seeing, so this is talking about the supermarket, so it was an old Carpetright facility. So we're seeing a huge, tracking slightly ahead of transactions, so it's a little bit positive there. Basket size is higher than we originally thought, so it's sucked up and over trading what we thought it was going to do. And to some extent, this is almost like a trial for us because we haven't done too many openings of small stores in recent years. This is the new local to the north, formerly a Mega Sports, and it's currently expected to mature slightly below forecast, well more than slightly, about 30% below forecast. But I think that mission is a residential mission. I think people are still trying to catch up. They're still shopping in the station store. We want to try and get them to go and shop in this store so that we can relieve the pressure on the station store. This shows what's happening with market share. So here's the before market share, and here's the after market share in terms of picking up those different missions from customers as they shop in Brixton as a market. So you see that we've actually grown our market share by almost 100% there, from 5 to 9%. And then this is focusing in on and serving new customers. So still some work to do in terms of trying to encourage people to use the new local to the north. Just going to skip through that slide. So just in summary, we feel there's some success there. While all the stores aren't trading the way we'd like to, we have seen significant change in the major numbers in terms of how we're serving customers, in terms of transactions, and also sales in that catchment. So we feel as though we've managed to serve the customer better through that mobility criteria by trying to pick out where the pressure points are in the network and where we can give them an alternative choice. Couldn't really not pass the opportunity to talk about groceries online. This continues to be a growth channel for all the grocery sector and in other retail sectors as well. And it is all about convenience as well, and it provides a bigger reach for us as a business in terms of our store network. But it does create operational challenges. I'm sure you've all had a poor experience with somebody over getting groceries delivered to home, or alternatively, you've had a poor experience with click and collect. So I think as an industry, we still need to learn about the logistics part. We seem to be good at getting food and other goods into stores, but we don't seem to be good to get them to people's homes either. So another area where we'll see a huge amount of growth in. So now, I just wanted to talk a little bit about really my views on what's happening from an m-commerce and a smartphone point of view. There's no secret that there's a huge amount of growth in terms of usage, and also how people are consuming the apps that Ben talked about, and driving down the actual user. The age groups are getting lower and lower. I mean, I don't even know now. It used to be like 14 when you got a first phone. Now I think it's more like 6 or 7, as you said. And you need to sort out parental control on your Xbox, don't you? But there's some key messages that retailers need to think about here in order to get to that point where we become, we're serving the customer in one total view. And I think I've got a couple of examples later on where I think retailers who've come to market quite late have really got that right, and how some of the older, more incumbent, established retailers are really struggling with how to get this joined up approach to how they serve the customer. So picking up on things like, do you have a social media strategy? Is it in place, and is it really fit for purpose, for example? So these are some of the adjectives that people use to describe their smartphone experiences. Now, wouldn't this be good if these were the adjectives used to describe your last shopping experience at a major supermarket? When did anyone ever say that when they went shopping that it was an awesome experience? Is anyone no one's going to confess to that? No, I don't think so. So this is the kind of wow factor that we're up against as a business and as an industry to try and overcome and basically deal with the changes that are happening in the industry. Just on the statistics, and this is IGD data, and I'm sure that as soon as he publishes data, it's immediately out of date. So I'm sure somebody else has got a different set of statistics. But we're past 50%, if not past 60%, in terms of smartphone usage. Unless you actually do forget your phone, most people will leave their home with it in their hands, and people are using it in store, and these are the uses they're using it for. So comparing prices. Interestingly, down here, making a purchase is interesting. I think more people are more likely to make the purchase out of a store. I don't know whether that's from an embarrassment point of view, or they don't like to be seen to, buying from another company while they're actually walking around another store of somebody else's brand. But I think you'll probably find these bars starting to slide to the right quite quickly. And of course, the mobile and m-commerce allows us to do more targeted offers and experiential-based engagement, and these are examples from grocery. So, Sainsbury's example. So, letting the consumer know what offers are on. Ocado are now taking 24% of their orders through their mobile app, and here's piece of advertising at Oxford Circus, so they really are encouraging people to do this activity out of home, out of work, when they're on the move. And with the Wi-Fi coming into the underground stations, and I think more of that will happen. And then I haven't experienced this firsthand, but I only heard about it, but the idea that you can order your fridge full of groceries to be at home when you get back from your holiday. I don't know how well that's been going for Tesco, but it seems like a good idea. And then just to come to e-tailer rather than a retailer, eBay is now taking, I think it's of the order of 1.5 billion sales through its mobile applications, which is a huge amount of income. And they're doing it with a very joined up process of how to link the mobile consumer with the physical product through this map here. And obviously with integrated payments now, you can pretty much do everything on your phone. So I just wanted to highlight what I think is an individual retailer who is really getting to this total retail. Now, I have to confess, I do like this company. I do buy a lot of things from them. But if you notice how I think they've only been going 5 or 6 years. They just received another round of funding from Barclays of 33 million to expand. But they have started from a point where they've put all the relevant pieces in place straight away without having to roll them out in a piecemeal fashion. So that you can do reserve and collect already at all their stores. They have a card where they can track their consumer, and they have a mobile application which gives you offers. And they also send you off. I didn't have time to grab examples, but I get an email pretty much every second day from them, linking back to all these areas. So in my view, they do have one direct experience for the customer, linking bricks and mortar and mobile in a seamless and very streamlined fashion. And consequently, they get me to buy lots of outdoor stuff. I'm sure they get other people to buy lots of outdoor stuff as well. And just by reference, and Ben has already given some examples, we shouldn't forget that the smartphone is also a sensor as well as a tool that we use. And people are now, or organisations are now using that data. The arrival of big data in terms of its infrastructure and also the way we can interpret it is here. So this is the Telefonica product called Smart Steps, which they launched about a year ago, using signal sensing from mobile phone. Handshake, I think, goes from the handset to the mobile mast, and then they can aggregate it on an aerial basis. This is showing density of people in London by time of day. And I think this is the way forward in using, helping us to understand more what mobile customers are doing. The problem with things like store sales and Nectar data is it's just not, the picture is good in terms of what's actually flowing out the stores, but it doesn't tell you much about how people. It doesn't tell you enough about how people are getting to those stores and how and what decisions they're making. And I think with data like this, you've got more background. So some thoughts. So are the things that we're seeing, are they structural changes, or is it just retail? Because retail changes, it's been changing for many, many years. We're now home delivery. Home delivery existed before we had websites. If you remember open all hours with Arkwright and having his basket on his bike. So is this just a different iteration of the things that we go through all the time? And I don't really have an answer. I'm just posing that question to you. Total retail is on its way, and customers will behave in a more mobile way. They are now, and they will continue to. I think convenience will play a huge factor in choice from a location and an in-store experience. So, the idea that it's not just about choice of store, but if that store is a big store and you just want to buy one thing, you don't want to be spending a long time in the store. Oops, apologise. And we'll continue to be challenged by customers. They'll demand more from what they buy and how they shop. And I guess another question is behaviour really changed, or is it just an adaptation to new tools, to new ways of engaging? I think I would probably say things will be changing, but not to forget that we still have bricks and mortar channels. And how does that align with the aspirations of retailers? So, do you create a nimble business which is going to move with the times, or are you going to sort of stand there? And there are lots of evidence of the high street companies like HMV who didn't see ahead what was happening. The other, the booksellers who didn't see what's coming. So, it's a watch out for us, certainly. And obviously, we should be mindful of the fact that why we're all commercial organisations. We need to generate tons and realise profits for shareholders. So I think it's a long game and there's no quick fix, but it's also a game of inches, because you only just need to be a little bit ahead of your competitors, and you will get that right service to the consumer. Thank you. I apologise if I ran over a little. Still for questions, yeah.
Got time for a couple of questions. If anyone has a question. Do you have a microphone or?
Yeah, there's a road device.
Oh, brilliant.
Martin.
Is it on? Martin Bellingham here. Quick question. Obviously, the high street has been in a bit of a turmoil in recent years. Do you think convenience retailing is going to reinvigorate those empty units, or it's actually going to cause a further demise and further sort of localisation of the living part of the high street as opposed to the dead part?
I think that what we see and what I've seen is that convenience grocery does actually reinvigorate the high street, and they can coexist with the independent sector. I'll give you an example. In Gerrards Cross, we opened a store in an old family business, a butcher's business, and we gave them an adjacent. So when we took the unit, we partitioned it. We took a store, and they have remained in the other side of the store, and both are doing well. So they can coexist, and it does drive people, does attract people back to the high streets, which may have suffered a little bit in terms of their economic times. Was there a second part to your question, Martin? No. So I think the answer is yes. I mean, I would throw it open to the floor in case anyone would disagree. No?
Any other questions?
Yeah.
From your graphs, it looks as though the big players, you're tracking each other quite closely.
Yeah.
And Lidl and Aldi are slight outliers, but not overwhelming outliers. What's the possibility of a really disruptive force coming in? Amazon grocery, for example, or something coming completely from left field that comes up with a new proposition?
What's the prospects? Well, I think I would say probably medium to high, Bob. I don't think that we should be not sensitive to a new entrant, and especially with the larger Amazon and eBay and those types of businesses who've come from nothing to be massive organisations very quickly. We know Amazon are already doing branded goods. They don't do. I think they'll struggle or find it a bit of a challenge to do fresh and frozen. And from a grocery point of view, they're very good at at the books and media type product, and they will, as I say, they'll sell you branded goods of non-perishables. So that's already happening.
I got a surprise birthday present last week, which was fresh food from a niche retailer operating in Cumbria with half a dozen very, very high quality stores suddenly going electronic and selling on the internet. So the other disruption may well be not a big player coming in, but lots of little players being enabled suddenly to start doing home deliveries nationally rather than just locally.
Yeah, no, and I think that's a good example of what I would say is occurring in certainly in grocery and probably in other sectors as well, a polarisation. So there's the middle ground where everyone was buying, consuming, and then there's been this polarisation to the discount side and the rise of the pound shops B&M Bargains, those guys, and also Lidl and Aldi, and then a move up market as well in terms of Waitrose or Ocado and small niche players like this business from Cumbria. Whether they can then play into the space where the, if you like, the fat of the meat is where everybody's buying, I wouldn't know whether that's the case, but you could easily see a shopping habit where you buy from the independent, but you also buy from the mainstream, and you may buy online from someone like Amazon in the future.
Any further questions?
Thank you. It's Andrew Alexander, University of Surrey. And I wondered if you could tell us a little bit, Andy, about the implications for the property sector of what we've talked about in our presentations. Clearly, retailers are a lot of change that it's having to cope with. Other stakeholders in the sector equally have to be responsive to this.
Yeah, so I think that it's going to be even more challenging for commercial property, with the exception perhaps of London, where I think there's just a huge amount of activity, probably mainly from the larger organisations and larger developers, but I think in the outside London and outside the main conurbations, it remains to be challenging because people are not investing. There's a huge oversupply of stock, as we talked about in traditional high street, and not a lot of people, organisations or retail businesses who are willing to take the stock that's there. I don't think we've been really helped with the planning legislation of the last few years, where we've had to, we as a society have been building more residential in the larger urban areas, but the expectation is you have to put retail on the ground floor. And if you look around any of the major cities, you see a lot of vacant retail underneath residential blocks, which is never going to get picked up because it's in the wrong place. You wouldn't have put it there in the first place unless you had to build it. So I think, and there's nothing you can do about it now. It's built, so unless you can convince change of use to something else, then community use or maybe back to residential, then that will remain. That's oversupply. So I think it's going to carry on being quite interesting and probably a tight belts, I think, for the property sector.
Maybe time for one last question. Okay. Oh, one last, yeah.
Duncan Shaw, University of Nottingham. My work's on understanding what interests customers. So I loved your slide on mobile as the sensor. That's absolutely nailing it for me. If you understand the location, if you understand it in real time, if you've got a whole history of that, if you understand the person who downloaded the app, their identifier, and you've got an excuse to interrogate them and talk to them, that's an amazing resource. So could you tell me a bit about what you see as the future of loyalty with that sort of tool?
That's a good question. I'm quite intrigued by the whole idea of loyalty, because I don't actually think loyalty really truly exists in a lot of retail sectors. We call them loyalty cards, but actually they're not, and in some cases people don't like using them. They'll use them in one store but not use them in another. And I think the idea that obviously a lot of what you just talked about is almost like remote sensing, so that the individual doesn't know they're being tracked in terms of the behaviour. They may or may not have allowed that to happen, but then you will get through their downloading of applications and how they consume that, you will get trackable history, which they will declare overtly or not to you as an organisation. And I think with so much the spectrum of things that are available, I think loyalty is going to become less. I think organisations will love to have loyal customers and think they do, but I think as a consumer, most people will be consuming from all different areas and they'll be buying for different reasons. Where I think loyalty might happen, it'll probably be around values. So probably things like so corporate social responsibility values. So they might align with a retailer or an organisation who sticks to regulation, pays their taxes, for example. has a true fair trade policy and sticks to it. Those things I think will become more important from a loyalty point of view than trying to get you to buy more through offers. When that might happen, I think it's already happening, but I don't think it's pervasive. So yeah, loyalty is something I'm a little bit struggling with in terms of whether it actually really exists or not. I don't know, maybe there's some views from the floor on that. No.
Thanks, Andy.
Okay.
Brilliant. Thank you. So now I'd like to introduce Professor David Martin, who's going to talk us through population 24/7. Who, when, where. Over to you.
Thanks. Okay, so I think there are lots and lots of very fascinating things in there, and I hope what I'm about to say is complementary to it. It comes to the same story, but from a slightly different perspective. It's just fantastic. What I want to do is to just get you to put the excitement about tracking the mobile consumer on pause for 5 minutes and think about the reality of what most of us are currently doing, which is actually geodemographically profiling residential populations, because we've got loads of rich socioeconomic data about them, which we don't have, although that last discussion about finding out about me from my app and perhaps building a profile of me that way is maybe where we'll come back at the end. What we tend to do is we have lots of rich data, census type information, we build geodemographic profiles from them, but it's all about where people are at their place of residence. Workplace data, which we're going to get fairly soon, early part of next year from 2011 census, will give us a very different geography. Fascinated that a few insights there around people were shopping all day from their workplace, not going very far. That workplace geography could well be very relevant in understanding the insights about that particular set of consumers. But the thing is, of course, what we're doing is we've got a few slices, some people at home, some people at work, and a lot of mobile data which we can't quite calibrate. What we really want is some kind of integrated way of bringing all those things together. If you like, a modelling framework that lets us put all that intelligence and insight together and apply it in a sensible, balanced way. And really what I'm going to do is just tell that little story with a couple of examples. And I'm going to come back to what I'm characterising as mappers and trackers. I'm going to give you a mapping presentation, and it follows really what was essentially a tracking presentation about where are these mobile devices. We can see where they are, but we don't know a lot about who those people are, their representativeness, exactly what activities they're doing. And the traditional mapping approach, the residential data, the geodemographics, tells us lots about the people. It's not very dynamic. And I'm suggesting you a future in which we might be able to put those things together in a smarter way. So, a couple of things to get straight to start with. I think it's already a given. I didn't need this first point now that I know what's been said. I think we can agree together that if you want to deliver daytime services or evening services, you want to deliver something that somebody wants to buy. Others in the room might be interested in providing some other kind of service to the passing customer or the people who are all going to be concentrated. We need a time-specific understanding of where we're going to find those people. They ebb and flow through the transportation network, through the urban structure. There are patterns to that. We need to understand those patterns and be able to predict and model them better. The conventional way that we think about residentially based, what are essentially nighttime populations, to characterise our population, to segment them, is quite limited because it's a segmentation based on one geography, which is only realised at the point where those people are probably almost certainly not engaged in most of this activity, apart from perhaps a bit of online shopping, but certainly not engaged in going out and using services over a counter. And I just throw in here, because it's inherent in the other things I say, I'm particularly keen on building gridded kinds of models of these kinds of data because they're time-free in the sense that the grid, geographic grid, mosaic kind of 1 kilometre squares, 100 kilometre squares, is just a useful device rather than a set of irregular areas for dealing with this kind of data, but actually it's not essential to the story that I'm about to tell. Interested there to see that Smart Steps product, and the data's gridded for precisely this kind of reason. So let's go on my little tour. I have a hypothetical region, so this is all done by if you like, a noddy example that you can hopefully stick with me as I go. And in my region, I've got lots of residential types. Been wandering around with my camera, drawing from the stock. Lots of different sorts of people living in lots of different sorts of places. And we would tend to geocode them, maybe at the level of addresses, more likely perhaps at the level of a postcode. It's really crude, the level of a census output area. But certainly we've got lots of reference points for those people that allow us to drop them into a set of zones where we tend to work still with that kind of data. We may have stuff from a census, you get a map. So absolute basic starting point, been doing it lots and lots of times. We've put lots of multivariate classifications through those data. Is Alex here? Alex Singleton's map. Yeah, I couldn't see you in the crowd. Alex has pre-canned for you a lot of lovely maps from 2011 census data, so if you just want to get the pattern fast without downloading everything. Westminster, usual resident household population. The reason I choose this one is, first of all, it shows the uniformity of the output area design, that we've got lots and lots of these zones that came out really close to target. And the other reason is, I just want you all to think about the fact that we are on that map right now, but none of us is represented in that pattern. That is the standard census map of this place, and all of us and most of the people working in any of the buildings around us or travel along the street are totally absent from that geography. It's a residential geography. It's what Westminster may get close to at 3 o'clock in the morning, maybe. And in a place like Westminster, even there, it may not be the right approximation. It would be better in most other parts of the country. So that map is really useful for some purposes, but it is a long way from telling us what we want to know to get these mobile consumers or to understand who's actually going through there. And this has got lots of applications in emergency planning and in thinking about exposure to environment, as well as the ones which most of you are probably primarily interested in, which is reaching those people as consumers. We could take the locations at which people are doing stuff during the day. We could also take those residential locations, we can map them onto a grid. So I like the grid because the grid's got lots of empty spaces. It recognises that at a given time, some of the geographic space is empty, which the zonal models tend not to do. So if we were rebuilding our map of Westminster, I haven't got data for that during the night time, we may well find that the parks are empty, that this building is empty, our grid would get down and it would start giving us empty spaces without having to have a geography of population that fills the whole geographic space. So it's got some utility. I need to rebuild this, but the example I've got later on matches this 2001 data. So that's Southampton region built onto the grid, using lots of postcode reference points for my residential population, and just simply doing that, I get the whole settlement geography back in a lot of detail, I get all the empty spaces back, I've got none of the clutter of the zones. It's a useful way of interrogating irregular polygons, drive times, buffers, and saying exactly how many people are we getting in here, and cutting out the clutter that comes with the zonal boundaries. Now, my hypothetical area has also got lots of non-residential locations, of a variety of types, large, small, places where people are shopping. I needed a shop for this audience, but I've got an emergency department, some kind of big office building, could be where we are now. And those also, if we have a geography for workplaces, we can drop them onto the areas, produce an alternative map, point to say something about what you might be seeing coming along with 2011 workplace statistics. Many of you will be very familiar with the output area data, the residential output areas. There was a little bit of data about workplace in 2001 census outputs, and you could go to an output area and get just a few counts about the numbers of people working there. But because those zones are standardised on the residential population size, they varied from 0 to 80,000 in terms of how many people worked in them. So there are output areas in the City of London, over at Canary Wharf, with many, many tens of thousands of people working in them. And we don't have much information about those people because ONS rightly are thinking about the places where there are very few people, and the data set's got to be standard, so it's not very disclosive. What happened in 2011 is that using the same algorithms, we've reapplied the zone design in order to produce a set of zones which are standardised on workforce population sizes, and that means that There will be coming along in the spring, and I wish I'd got more detail. It says the prospectus has still not yet gone public on precisely which counts, so I can't tell you precisely which counts, but a set of data which tell you about the workplace population, all those people who might go shopping while they're at work, who were mentioned earlier, with a lot more social characteristics than we had in 2001, because they're on a geography which has been standardised by the size of the workplace population, and therefore we can have more detailed data. Boundaries are already available. If you want to have a play with them, just see what might come along, but that's going to be, I think, quite an exciting product. What happens with it in a place like Southampton is all the vaguely pink output areas in there have got enough workers that you can subdivide those output areas. If you want to produce workplace statistics, we can actually take an output area in a business centre and we can provide data about the workforce in smaller zones. But obviously out in some of those residential areas all around the edges of the city, we want the same data. We've got to put a few output areas together for the workforce data because, of course, there's not many of them during the day. So one other, any of you from Bristol or know Bristol, this is just an instance of what happens in there. The area in the centre, which is not kind of shaded out in grey, was one output area, and it has been aggregated up from the postcodes to create 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, about 8 of these new workplace zones, and it's the Broadmead shopping area. So what was one output area where we had a couple of tables of data about the workplace population will be around about, this is demo data, around about 8 workplace zones with a lot more social characteristics of the workforce that is in that area. So that could be quite a useful contribution to our story of trying to understand something about the socio-demographics of a different population representation over time, because most of these people will be there obviously during the working day. Come back to that. So that was a little aside. I've got my workplaces and I've got some new exciting data heading along the way, which I hoped I might be able to show a bit more by autumn 2013, but come back in spring 2014. I could put them on the grid as well, so I can put my my workplaces on the grid. I've got one grid of residential population, another grid with some workplace data. Actually, I've also got a transportation network out there with quite a bit of data scattered around at the moment about the numbers of people who flow around, how they travel, what mode they use, which means that I could add them into my grid. And what I start ending up with is a universe of potential locations for population. Now, if we were in central London, actually we've probably almost got a continuously occupied space, and all that happens is the densities in some 100-metre squares go up during the day and go down in the evening, and in others it's adjusting. But actually across most of the UK, for everybody who's not a central London dweller, there's a lot of empty space. People cluster into business centres, they cluster into centres of employment, they move back into suburban and residential areas, and their pattern is a really complex one. So what we've got is a lot of places which are much more tightly defined than, for example, the cells in a mobile network. You could tie them down if you've got all these people with a GPS-enabled device, but at the moment, most of our devices have not got GPS on all the time. We've got cell-type data. It doesn't tell us exactly where those people are. And if you go into ordinary Britain, that's not giving you a very clearly demarcated location. What we've got is people moving through a space with a lot of places that human activity takes place at different times of day. So our problem, if we want to understand the whole population picture through time, is that this lot's changing continuously. All of those squares in my example had some people in them sometime, but neither my census data, my mobile phone cell data, nor even my census workplace data are going to tell me very clearly which people are in which cell at which time. They're all giving me pointers, but none of them answers that question. So the nighttime model, my people are basically sitting on those residential locations. I don't know where this is, sleepy South Hampshire somewhere where none of the workplaces are active at night time in my example maybe. I've got a daytime one where lots of people are in those workplace activities, some of them on the road maybe. But what happens on a Sunday morning? Or a Wednesday morning in the school holidays? How many time slices do we need? Well, it seems to me that if we really want to understand some of these patterns, going for distinct time slices isn't the route that's going to get us there from a mapping perspective, because the census workplace data is very rich, but it gives us residential and workplace. The tracking data from the telephony is very rich. It gives us this beautiful continuum of people moving around all the time, but the more time slices we've got, actually, the less certainty we've got about what were those people doing there at those times and which kinds of people were they. And we probably need to be able to put these two things together. Very interesting project, International Journal of GIS, a Finnish group, Ahola et al., had a go at modelling population moving around in Helsinki, and they went for 14 time slices, if you like. They took a typical working week and said, well, there's about 14 periods in which one kind of population distribution or another prevails. It's a really interesting paper. They draw together all sorts of interesting data sources, but whether or not the answer is 14, I doubt, because the things that we're all interested in actually are continuous through time as well as continuous through space. And what we really would want to be doing is to keep all the temporal information and then somehow drawing the analysis from both the space and the time in order to answer your particular question. For example, when is going to be the biggest crowd passing the door of this potential convenience store location? It's no good if the answer is time slice 3, if time slice 3 is too coarse or wrongly defined for that location. So, a couple of observations about how we might solve this, and then a quick look at some work we've been doing on it. All of those places where human activity goes on, all of those retail locations, educational locations, residential locations, have quite distinct temporal profiles. And most of them are cyclical. Time of day, commuting pattern, day of week, school and college term dates, seasons, mean that we can, if we step back far enough, see fairly regular patterns to the way that most of those spaces are used. They may be perturbed by specific events on a specific day, but the long run, which would allow us to make, for example, forecast of people at a location, are quite strongly cyclical. Night and day, much too simple. 14 time slices, I have a feeling is probably also too simple. What we actually find is a situation in which the different time activities of spaces where we're all occupying our urban structure, they interact in very, very complex ways. Just having a few simple patterns of the school run, some holidays, a weekend, day of week, immediately brings us an enormous range of complexity. If we wanted to model that, we want to predict it, going and sort of slicing it up is probably not sufficient. This one's interesting. This is the results of an on-campus survey for the University of Southampton trying to do some transport planning, working out when are people on the campus. That's the time profile. There's obviously a couple of people on the University of Southampton who've owned up to being there at 7 o'clock in the morning. And there are a few people, I'm surprised it's not bigger actually, who are there at 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock at night, probably postgrads frantically being beaten up to finish their thesis, sitting there burning midnight oil. But for that particular location, we've got a time profile. Here from a very different data source, this is from a time use survey, a few years old, asking people about when they do their shopping activity. Really distinct time profile to it. If you've got point of sale data within your business, you would have your own profile for this. You would know what does the pattern for that store look like on a Thursday. But what we've got going on in here is, if you like, the data which gives us the temporal signals about the places we're interested in. And effectively, there are increasingly a huge range of places where we can get those time profiles from. We can get them very readily within many of your businesses about the ways in which customers use a facility. We know a stack about the education system. We actually know rather a lot about the healthcare system. Increasingly got data which we can interrogate about when businesses of different types are active. We know quite a lot about leisure flows. All of these are giving us signals for when we're using particular places and what their daily and seasonal and weekly patterns look like. The direct continuous observation of population, that Smart Steps data, is really powerful but in a different way. It gives us proxies for where all these people are moving around, but the problem is they're really hard to disentangle. How many people in the room have got more than one mobile or more than one device? Maybe there you go. So when we track you lot, what on earth are we tracking? No idea at all. You track a device, it's the device you're tracking. You're not tracking those consumers. You're tracking a very muddled signal for where those people are, when things are switched on, what they're doing, what their activity is, what their demographics are. And really, we've got lots of categories of people that we're interested in here, some of whom are going to be consumers for your products, some of whom are not. What we've been playing with in Southampton for the last 5 years or so is a series of interconnected projects attempting to draw some of these things together. And I'm not suggesting that what we're doing is your answer, but I think it's part of the jigsaw. We've been building something called Surface Builder 24/7, which is effectively taking a really big library of activity locations and time profiles. So saying, we know about this school, we know what the times are when the children are there, we know about this workplace, we know about the time profiles might look like when people are there. We've got other places which have got similar profiles. We should be able to copy them across in the absence of more detailed information about that building or that site. We could at least say we know other workplaces that are like that one have got this kind of profile, these kinds of people. And have been building, if you like, a generalised modelling framework for mapping the population for a specific target time. 3 o'clock on a Wednesday afternoon, 9 o'clock on a Friday morning, or, interestingly, 2 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon, which looks completely different. There is a whole presentation on how the modelling works, which is not the presentation I'm giving. This is not a spatial interaction model. Think of it as a reweighted map, where every location is drawing down some of the available population for a particular target time, so that we contain the total population and we're moving them around between the grid squares. Lots and lots of separate questions about how you do the flows. You could build in a spatial interaction model. It's a software tool that we've been experimenting with that at least works for the totality. So for example, here we've got Southampton, same area you saw before, but this is the weekday 4 o'clock picture. The weekday 4 o'clock picture, which has got lots of people still in the city centre, which has got lots of people out on the major transportation networks, which represents various clusters. Interestingly, the salt and pepper represented by lots of local schools and other community facilities is starting to die down at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and people are drifting back into residential areas. But it's only the younger population that's doing that. We know all this. It's the activity that we all observe in our daily lives, but what we haven't got is a very integrative way of modelling that temporal transfer of people. And there's lots of nice ways of playing around with the visualisations and putting a slider bar across your model, which I wouldn't dare do in front of a live audience because something will go wrong. But you see what's happening. Effectively, just another way of visualising those same data. Almost at the end here. It seems to me that our solution towards really getting to grips with these mobile populations is that we need both the mappers, the stuff I've just been describing in a way. This is what we're doing here, which is effectively to build a constraint set of locations where people can be and to build some profiles that give us some sensible weights about who ought to be there that can be interrogated for the times you're interested in. And we need the trackers, the people who are trying to work out what about those mobile telephone signals? What about those geo-referenced tweets? What about the use of the app where somebody was buying something? Because it seems to me unless we've got some decent time-sensitive population models from the mappers, we will not be able to calibrate the signal that you're getting from the trackers. It might work for something very, very specific, but I think we'll find that we can't generalise those applications unless we really get our act together at how we model both of those things together. We try and bring the two approaches together. So there's some food for thought there. What we are currently doing is really working on an application strand and an implementation strand. The application strand is where now 3 different PhD students are working on ways of pushing this forward for specific uses. One's actually thinking about flood hazard and which people are exposed to flood events. Another is thinking about emergency planning scenarios, because there's been a lot of interest in that industry about this residential population model we've got is not much use for planning for a daytime emergency. And what's going on at the moment is new PhD students just started working with Ordnance Survey, thinking about how we could actually start tying this back to the building level data sets and the kinds of signals which we might get about what's going on in those building footprints and the way in which population is moving through the day. I'm always interested to talk to anybody who's got really nice reference time profiles that says this is the way that a 3,000 square foot store typically goes through the day, or this is the way which this particular railway station, lots of London data on that front, fit together that give us some of those profiles. And we're just, with Mark Birkin in Leeds, starting to do some first moves at trying to cross-calibrate the mapping view and the tracking view. Now, I don't know what the detail will look like, but I reckon in 5 years' time we will be doing a lot more of this in a more sophisticated way. And the thing that will unlock it all is when we manage to unlock the cross-calibration of the mapping and the tracking. As you would expect with so many bits of data in a presentation, there is a list of acknowledgements as long as your arm, but certainly Sam Lung, Sam Cockings, Alan Smith, Becky Martin, Rebecca Martin, Mark Birkin, bit of ESRC money and various people's projects have all contributed to the thinking I'm doing around this issue. So I hope that that just spurs some discussion, if not now, later in the day as well.
I think we've got time for maybe a question or two. Yeah, if anyone's got a question.
Can I just make an observation?
Yeah, go for it. And there's one at the back as well. Paul.
Right, okay. I was really struck there, you mentioned about signals and complexity and so on. And as you unfolded all this, I was thinking that we used to talk about residential population and then workplace and so on. But it also made me think of sort of qualitative and psychological stuff, because when people are in different places at different times, I'm sure they're a different person. And you're either under pressure and have to buy, or you're sauntering about, and it gets more and more complex the deeper you dig.
And I'm sure that the answer is we do this at multiple levels. So tracking where the people are from the mobile phone will give us some magnitudes, which will be kind of useful. But my sense is we will rapidly get frustrated with what we learn from that, because we're not actually tracking the thing that we're interested in, and that it's quite a weak proxy. The issue of whether or not Dave Martin actually on his device uses an app which is related to his location, and you start getting some really rich data from that about what I'm doing and where I'm doing it, that might be really important, but there are going to be a lot of massive different biases in how that reflects across different population groups, the types of activities they're engaged in, the types of services they use. So it's not still going to get us into untapped areas. It might just mean that we understand better the people we've got, and I think that's where we may run out of steam if we can't think about how do we really calibrate some of this against where the entire population is and which groups are we not tracking.
Hello. Paul Longley from UCL. Just a question about something that will probably recur at various points today. There's always a sense when you're talking about these sorts of projects of the receding horizon. Sort of the more that we find out, the more that we realise we don't know. And I was just wondering from a research point of view whether you've actually thought about trying to summarise that in any summary measures of the heterogeneity of characteristics over space and the heterogeneity of characteristics over time.
I'd say we're at the level of where we've had quite a lot of conversations around it, but have not yet implemented a set of, here's some first measures to go play with. We built a lot of this using data that was just before the 2011 census. So what we really quite like to do is to build some of the things that we've discussed and made little demonstrators of using the 2011 data, the workplace data, some of the other sources, which might then give something which others could cross-reference and see, how useful, how well does that fit with our view of those same data sets. Because a lot of the stuff that's in here is from places like the annual business inquiry service, there's hospital episodes data in there, there's if you like, lots of data sources which wouldn't, when we started, have been available to other people. Actually, open data is making this all very exciting, because lots of things have become open which weren't open when we began. So I'm quite keen to, in a sense, put some stuff out which others can then have a look at and say, well, how does that match to our view from the same data sources? So it's kind of at the coffee room conversation stage, some of those summary measures about what's going on, which places have got the biggest churns, which ones have got the people who stay put. Interestingly, you begin this discussion, you rapidly start thinking about immobile populations. What about the very elderly, who actually don't move from their house very much? What about some people whose lives are constrained by very small neighbourhood boundaries between the convenience store, the school, the residential location? Their use of the space is completely different. And I think we could potentially get some really interesting measures from that, but we've not got there.
Absolutely fascinating presentation. I wrote one of the chapters in the 1991 Census Data Handbook suggesting this is where we want to go to. And one of the reviewers who looked at the entire handbook said, and of course it's nice to see Bob's whimsical and completely fanciful ideas as to how we're going to track people all the time rather than just looking at residential populations. The one thing which I saw missing, and I think that it's because you're still looking at census temporal scales or full reports of where people work during the week, is the big honeypots, the Premiership football grounds, the multiplex cinemas, the Westfield or Metro Centre style shopping centres, which have their own patterns, which in terms of scale are probably bigger than a lot of things you're looking at the moment, but can be modelled in.
Yes, we've got stacks of those data sets, and certainly one of the people who's mentioned in the acknowledgements there has been scraping city centre car park usage figures, for example, as a way of thinking about how many people are flowing in and using urban facilities which are not measured in that way. So they're in the concept, and in fact the data, the gates for all of the Major League Football games, not too difficult to get hold of numbers for and dates for. When we get down to the really large facilities, it's fascinating. And you know, Heathrow Airport, after London, Heathrow Airport gets more of the flows than most of the other British cities in terms of the people that are coming in and flowing through, disappearing off the map, coming back in, flows that are generated, and also some of the really big national destinations, the British Museum. Remarkably, the what's the ski place at Milton Keynes? Somebody give me the name. Yeah, that some of those they are beacons on the national landscape. So we've in a sense the modelling framework is the same. But we have not been concentrating on that specifically. Somebody else may well, next person come along may well be fitting them into the framework.
With the SRC here, just one quick point. Automated number plate recognition. The National Police database of automated number plate recognition exists. It is clearly a very sensitive data set, but it's a perfect example of somewhere where ESRC might be able to provide sandbox access that would be extremely rich for this.
Another kind of tracking.
Really fascinating. Excellent. I believe coffee's arrived. I think if we have a quick break, everyone back here, Keith?
Yeah, past 2:45 would be good, I think.
Back 1:45.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.